They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there.
We don't need to go populist left or populist right. We don't need to embrace neo-Marxism or neo-fascism, these disastrous movements from the 20th century. Turns out the answer is pretty much our Bill of Rights, our story. Embrace freedom. That's the answer.
And if the LP has a purpose, it's not to put people to sleep. It's to wake them up.
We're here because we love liberty, and we're here because we hate injustice. We are here to save mankind. We are here to fight.
Join us, the Libertarian Party, in perhaps the most exciting, grandest endeavor in history, the restoration of American liberty.
Ideas spread, they can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.
Hello and welcome to episode 50 of Decentralized Revolution, a podcast from the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus and Mises PAC. I'm Aaron Harris and I'm your host. We're finally back with episode 50, a lot later than I thought it would be. I'm all settled in Knoxville after not having a desk to record from for a couple of weeks and getting things unpacked and set up and dealing with my day job. We had intended for episode 50 to be with Ron Paul. Many of you may have heard that in the Facebook group. Mike announced that a couple of weeks ago. And Dr. Paul is still going to be with us at some point, but we got some wires crossed in getting him scheduled when we first contacted him a month or so ago. And that cost us a couple of weeks. It's a long story. Then, unfortunately, just a couple of days before we were set to record here on April 27th, which is when I'm recording this, we just got the heartbreaking news that Dr. Paul and his wife, Carol, they lost their daughter, Lori, to cancer. So naturally, we're going to give him plenty of time to grieve before asking him to spend some time with us talking about his career and what he's done for the liberty movement here on Decentralized Revolution. So I will be praying for and have been Dr. Paul and his family. And if you're the sort of person who does that, I think you should too. I've got to apologize for the audio quality of my end of the conversation in this episode and the next one. Getting things set up in my new office. Something happened. I didn't get my microphone connected and or enabled properly. And I think my audio actually just got captured by the computer's internal mic rather than by the microphone that Tom Woods tells everyone to buy. So as you can hear, though, I've got the problem fixed. Things should sound great for when we do have Dr. Paul on a few weeks down the line, we hope. I'm also going to record soon with Angela McCardle to talk about her run for chairman of the Libertarian National Committee. We're supposed to record with her today, but she had some technical issues. So we'll reschedule soon, and I hope things finally smooth out here with all the gremlins with getting this podcast recorded, and plan to get back into our groove of at least one episode a week. The next one will be out, should be out in less than a week from when this one hits. Now, if there's anyone that you'd like for me to have on going forward, I'd love to hear your ideas. You can message me on Facebook. My name there is Aaron Keith Harris, or you can email me at communications@lpmisescaucus.com. So we do have a great guest for episode 50 nonetheless, someone who's been working hard on the issue Dr. Paul works hardest on, and that's war. Dan McKnight, like Dr. Paul, is a veteran. He's the chairman and founder of BringOurTroopsHome.us, and they've been around just a couple of years, and they've been doing an amazing job of getting people, including veterans, mainly veterans, involved in telling governors and legislators about how we can take care of the troops in the best way possible, which, as we all know, is to keep them out of illegal wars of choice and let them focus on defending their country and hopefully have a boring career on a base here in the U.S. For a while. And the great thing is that Dan and his group, they've come up with an approach that uses decentralization to make it harder for the federal government to start and fight these illegal wars. I think you're really going to find this interesting. He's also got some good advice as to what he would say to someone about to make the same decision that he made a couple of decades ago about joining the military. Lots of great stuff in here. Great story about Scott Horton. So please enjoy my conversation with Dan McKnight. Dan McKnight, welcome to Decentralized Revolution.
Thanks, Aaron. Glad to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I've been meaning to have you on for quite a while. I think I tried to get you on like a few months ago, but I just didn't have the right contact info or something. So I'm grateful that you and Hunter were able to book this. And speaking of Hunter, who works with you, me, you, and Hunter all have something in common, and that's this book right here. We're all on the acknowledgments page of Scott Horton's book.
Right
Is it, you got it back there? Yeah. Yeah. I was able to help him do some, editing and just bouncing ideas off and stuff like that. What's it like, someone who's in your line of work, having an ally like Scott Horton?
Look, there's no greater voice in the anti-war movement than Scott Horton. He's been right on this as long as he's been around, as long as he's been in the public scene. And he's got such a great following, especially in the liberty movement, being the director of the Libertarian Institute and the executive editor of antiwar.com and the author of 2 incredible books. No one speaks more clear about this than Scott Horton, and he has the ability to speak to the left and the right. And my history with Scott kind of starts a little bit strange. Someone recommended his book to me right before I went on my honeymoon to the Dominican Republic, and I'm laying on a beach chair drinking umbrella drinks on the beach with my new wife right by my side on my honeymoon, and I'm screaming at this book that I'm reading on the beach, staring out at the beautiful ocean. And I got home from my honeymoon. I sent him an email. I didn't know him yet, and I said, "Hey, thanks for ruining my honeymoon. You really dampened the mood, but I appreciate your book." And ever since then, we've developed a great friendship, and he's an incredible ally in this movement.
Yeah, he brings a lot of things to back to your mind that you don't really remember over the last 20, 30 years, our lifetime, and really pulls it all together and kind of gets this narrative and shows you what's really going on with American foreign policy. And I want to get into some of that soon. I want to get into your background too, and how and why you started Bring Our Troops Home. But there's some fairly recent news over the last few days, and I heard you on Dave Smith talking a little bit about this, and I wanted to get your take, maybe now that you've had a few more days to think about it, and that's the Afghan withdrawal. That's been promised for years now. It was supposed to happen, I think, within the next couple of weeks was the previous deadline. Now it's September 11th. Is it going to happen? What do you think of our chances of finally getting out of that war?
It's a great question, and it's something that I'm losing a lot of sleep over. Look, America made a promise. President Trump negotiated the Doha deal with members of his foreign policy team, and he made a promise on America's behalf. He made a promise that America, if we honored the terms of that deal, we would be out on May 1st. And one of the contingencies on that deal was that if we weren't gone, lock, stock, and barrel on May 1st, the Taliban would resume fighting on May 2nd. And so I'm excited that the president is taking it seems like a very aggressive approach to have us out by September 11th. But what has he done from the time he took office up until today to actually honor America's promise and keep our word to be gone by May 1st? What's going to change from May 1st to September 11th that's going to allow him to turn his back on the advice of all the generals and all those career warmongers that want to keep us there forever? What's going to change? The answer to that question, Aaron, is nothing good, right? The fighting season starts in the spring and it goes through the summer in Afghanistan. And by us simply being there, we're going to create a new perpetual state of this war. And I pray that we come home on September 11th. I don't think we will. And I'm really, really offended at the date that they selected. It seems like it's political theater, that it's poetry for the repetition, literary repetition. It's just a date that was picked out of the blue because it had some significance to American history, and they wanted to have that political theater. It's offensive to me. May 1st would have been a much more appropriate time. And to be honest with you, January 1st of 2002 should have been when we came home.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Scott makes the point in what's the Afghanistan book's name? I forget.
Fool's Errand.
Fool's Errand. Yeah. He makes the point that, everything the government got accomplished that was kind of worth anything was done by Christmas. And all the rest of this has been, I think, just gravy for the defense contractors. And we're going to get into that. Let's start with just tell me a little bit about yourself. Where you're from, how you ended up I think you started the Marines, ended up in the Army. Give us a little bit of your background.
Sure. Born and raised in Boise, Idaho, middle-class family here in kind of a really small, sleepy town. The day that they offered the ASVAB test in high school, I turned my nose up and I skipped school that day. I wasn't going to take it. There was no chance in hell that I was going to serve in the military. I was going to go out and make my fortune in the business world. And so I didn't even take the ASVAB test. It wasn't even on my radar. And after high school graduation, I was kind of a bit of a burnout. I was living down in the hippie district of Boise, in the North End, not really making anything in my life, didn't have a job. My truck was broken down. And me and a buddy, just on a whim, walked to the Marine Corps recruiting station, signed up, and I left a couple weeks later and he backed out. And so I was in the Marine Corps. I loved my time in the Marine Corps, but it was in the 90s, and President Clinton was doing his best to defund the Marine Corps. He wanted to eliminate the Marine Corps. He said it was a repetition, that their mission was the same as the Armies, which is quite offensive to all Marines.
Right.
You collectively put all Marines in one room and you got 6 brain cells, right? That's the joke about the Marine Corps, but we're very good at what we did. We were war fighters, amphibious warfare. We could fight in the air, on land, and sea. And anyway, the pride of the Marine Corps was being in the Marines. It was being a Marine. And President Clinton changed that. He gave everybody an opportunity to reclassify with a different job that was not war fighting, or to get out and transfer to another service. And I didn't want to be a cook or an admin. So I transferred into the Army. It was a dark day for me, but I did love my time in the Army. It was just different. And I served throughout the 90s in the Army, and then came home in 98, enrolled in college and the Idaho National Guard. I wanted to finish my career in the Guard while I was going to school. And I got out in early 2001 so I could finish the last semester of college. And during that time, we got attacked on September 11th. And me and countless other Americans went straight to the recruiting office and signed back up after September 11th. And I re-enlisted in the Guard, knowing that I would get a chance to go and avenge the attacks on September 11th. I'd bought into the George W. Bush mindset that you're with us or you're against us, and the world's going to hear from America. And I want them to hear from Dan McKnight. And so I re-enlisted in the National Guard into an attack helicopter aviation battalion, knowing that the Apache helicopters were the perfect premier fighting weapon for Afghanistan. And a couple years later, we deployed, went to Afghanistan, and we were there 2005, all of 2006, and the very beginning of 2007. And while we were there, that's when my mindset about the war and what we were doing there really started to change. I started to question the things we were doing. We weren't actually fighting a war. We were doing things that I wasn't trained to do. We were building not personally, but we were protecting those that were building roads and water treatment facilities and schools for children and women, securing their free and fair elections, delivering water and food supplies. We weren't there actually fighting the war after about the first 4 months we were in country. And so I really started to question what the hell the military was doing there. And that's when I really started to study this issue of constitutional war and just war principles, and studying Cicero through the great thinkers of the Roman Empire, and really started to study the just war doctrine and realized that we were not in a just war and we had done it wrong. And I came home upset, injured, left the military and went dormant for about 10 or 12 years. And I was a silent dissenter. And it wasn't until I met a gentleman named Danny Scherzen, who is a fantastic anti-war author, that I was able to put a label on what my feelings were, and that I wasn't a silent dissenter. I was a patriotic dissenter, because my dissent wasn't over serving my nation or defending the Constitution. My dissent was over the fact that we went there without a proper authorization and that we stayed just too damn long. And so that's where we came to where we're at. And we started to bring our troops home because of something that happened to us while we were in Afghanistan. Being National Guardsmen, the active duty military that we were attached to was the 82nd Airborne and the 10th Mountain Division of Fort Drum, New York. And they didn't want us. Everyone kind of looked down at the National Guardsmen. They felt that we were kind of, weekend warriors, part-time soldiers. Even though we were very proficient at what we did, we looked a little funny. We had bellies, our hands were in our pockets. We didn't look like the real soldiers. And we couldn't get the support we needed. We had a hard time getting replacement boots and uniforms and body armor and Kevlars and gloves and things that soldiers need to survive and do their job. And out of frustration, I went through my chain of command, telling them that my guys, the guys that I was in charge of, were suffering and needed help. They needed those materials, those supplies. And the chain of command couldn't do anything about it. And so I got really frustrated, and I was deep in the Pesh River Valley of Afghanistan, which is up in the northeastern quadrant by the Korengal, the Valley of Death, where the war was being fought in the first part of the war. And I got a satellite phone, and I climbed to the top of a hill where I could get a really clear signal. And I called the commander-in-chief of the Idaho National Guard, which was our governor. I had a friend that gave me the direct phone number to him, and I called him straight from Afghanistan. And I said, "Hey, Governor Risch, this is Dan McKnight. I'm a sergeant in the Idaho National Guard. I'm in Afghanistan, and I need your help." And I went on to tell him what was going on. And he had just been appointed the governor maybe a month before that, maybe 2 months, when our full-time governor went to D.C. to work for President Bush. And he goes, "Sergeant McKnight," he goes, "I've been the governor for a minute. I don't know what I can do, but I'll do something." And I hung up the phone. I was kind of a Hail Mary. And 48 hours later, I got notification from my chain of command that the supplies that we needed were on their way from Idaho. And so I held this Jim Risch, this Governor Risch, up on this pedestal. He was a hero, right? He had done something for me that nobody else in my chain of command was willing to do. And he put his neck out there and found a way to help us. And so I've always held him up as kind of this hero. And fast forward to 2019, when I had this awakening. Governor Risch was now Senator Risch from the great state of Idaho. And he had worked his way up in seniority, and he'd become the chairman of the powerful Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. And I thought, by God, I've got a chance here to call old Jim Risch one more time. I live in a small state. I've got probably better access to my senators than anybody from California or Ohio or Pennsylvania. So I thought I'd take a chance and ask him to support a way to end the war as the chairman. And I wrote an op-ed. I'm not much of a writer. Again, I'm a trained Marine, so we write in crayons. And I wrote an op-ed, but it was picked up in 9 newspapers in Idaho, and it was published. And it really started getting a lot of attention. And Jim Risch came back to Boise, and so I hired a buddy of mine who had a camera, and we went to a Chamber of Commerce event where Senator Risch was speaking, and I told my buddy to film it. I'm going to get Senator Risch on record. And I asked him a question, and when I raised my hand and stood up, he goes, "Dan, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I remember you from 2005 or 2006. I remember that situation. I even read your guest opinion, and I agree. We're done with nation building. We are through sending money to these countries that simply don't want us there." And I thought, my God, that was easy. 2 for 2. Jim Risch is going to do it again. Well, the son of a gun got back on an airplane and flew back to Washington, D.C., and over the next 90 days, voted 3 more times to extend the war in Afghanistan, Yemen, and Syria indefinitely. And that's when I decided it was time for a pissed off non-commissioned officer to rally the troops and to attack this in a military efficient manner. And we decided we were going to gather veterans together, and we were going to take our message to Washington, D.C., and that's how the organization started.
That reminds me a lot of a story. I interviewed Dennis Kucinich a few years ago for a completely different project. And I used to be from Ohio. I am from Ohio. I'm in Tennessee now. He was an Ohio congressman. And we were talking about just that, the war. And in 2006, in 2008, I forget if it was 06 or 08. I think it was 06. That a lot of the congressional Democrats campaigned on, hey, Iraq is a disaster. Yep. We need to get out. And the Democrats, it was a midterm year. The Democrats made some big gains. And Kucinich was like, okay, this is great. He's reminds me a little bit of Tulsi. I don't think he has military experience, but he's kind of bad, really bad on economics, but on the war thing, he's really good. So he's like, great, we're going to get in there. We're going to start to defund this war. And so there's a couple months after the election, they all show up in D.C. and vote for the speaker. And he said the next thing we voted on was just to continue the funding.
Yep.
And so there you have it on both sides of the aisle. America, our politics is supposed to be so divided, but you see both sides lying right to their constituents' faces. What Obama campaigned on. So there's got to be something that's causing this. Why are these two teams that supposedly both hate each other, both bending over backwards to keep the wars going, and doing so when they acknowledge that it's wrong and they tell their constituents that they're going to stop? What is it? And as someone who's been lobbying and trying to get the word out, what have you observed that explains that?
Sure. And I'm going to apologize if this isn't acceptable on your show, but we always had a phrase that ship birds of a feather flock together, right? And so it doesn't matter left or right. The warmongers, the neocons, the neolibs, those that are career warmongers, they will find each other in the darkest alley. It doesn't matter where they're at. And they will bind together because they're all influenced by the same people. Every big giant building in Washington, D.C. made of steel and glass is a defense contractor, right? Raytheon's there and General Dynamics, all of them are there in D.C. And there's a reason for that. It's not because D.C. is beautiful, because it's not. It's a swamp. They're there because they're close to the seat of influence. They're there because they can get the biggest bang for their buck. Their influence over Washington, D.C., and people like Liz Cheney and the money that she funnels through her cowboy pack that she runs is all from defense contractors. And she peddles that influence throughout Washington, D.C. And there's probably, I don't know, I think it was 40 some odd congressmen that she donated money from her cowboy pack to their campaigns. And they have to pay fealty to her. So if she wants to keep this war going, she's got a ready-made army of congressmen and congresswomen that have to do her bidding. And that doesn't come from her pockets. That comes from the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us of. And so, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And those defense contractors, they answer to nobody. And they make their allies through the military, right? They take generals, 2 and 3 and 4-star generals, and when they leave their military career, where they've been public servants working for basically peanuts for most of their life, and they offer them $1 million or $2 million or $5 million a year contract to be a consultant or a board member. Those generals then can go back to their buddies who were their colonels or their lieutenant colonels on their staffs and buy their influence with them. And those generals will keep that war propagating and perpetuating over and over and over and over again. It's such a well-oiled machine. And then you put a useful idiot in place like Liz Cheney to peddle the influence to the elected class. And then there's no chance whatsoever of the average citizen soldier in the National Guard or the average soldier coming from rural Alabama or rural Georgia who's now serving in the Army or the Air Force or the Marines to have any influence whatsoever on when and where we serve. And that's the way the system's designed. And we swear an oath to a constitution, not to part of the Constitution, not to a piece here or a piece there, but to the entire Constitution. And our oath of enlistment says that I, Dan McKnight, do solemnly swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. And then it goes on to say, and follow the orders of the president and the orders of the officers in my charge. It's in that order for a reason, right? The Constitution's first, not the president, and certainly not the officers. And you could make the argument that the officers, especially the field grade brass, the generals, are the ones that have kept this war going on forever because they change strategies. They change missions, and then they come home and lie about their successes when they do their handoff to the next general that comes along. And I think we had 4 or 8, I can't remember, 4-star generals, at the end of World War II. And I think we've got 80 4-star generals now. They create their own good old boys club because they know that once they're done, that big giant paycheck is there waiting for them. And that's why the system is broken because of the blood of these warmongers and these merchants of death that they're buying with American taxpayer dollars.
I enjoyed the way you described Liz Cheney, an heiress to a war profiteer, right? I mean, and it is very apt. Have you gotten any phone calls, overtures from the military-industrial complex to say, "Hey, Dan, what are you doing here? Why don't we? What can I do for you to make you not do things like the Defend the Guard Act and speak up about this?" Have you anybody tried to lean on you?
Sure, not directly, but indirectly. When we first started this organization, we took 100 veterans, like-minded veterans, and some state lawmakers from around the country back to Washington, D.C. on Veterans Day weekend or Veterans Day week of 2019. So that's first part of November of 2019. And we just had a meeting where we would talk, and we had guest speakers, and then we all broke out and went to go see our congressmen and senators while we were in D.C. Unfortunately, President Erdogan from Turkey happened to be in D.C. at the exact same time we were there, and so we were kind of preempted. And then shortly after that, the impeachment trial started, and so our message was not really well received because of the timing. But the delegations that we went and visited, all of them were very courteous. Who's going to turn down a veteran to come talk to them about war, right? They all accepted us. They all received us. They all took pictures and gave the handshakes, and some of us even left with trinkets and gifts from these senators. But when we went into Liz Cheney's office with some friends of mine from Wyoming who were part of the organization, a great libertarian-minded, liberty-focused member of the Republican Party, actually, his name is Tyler Lindholm. He went into the office, and we asked a direct question of Liz: under what conditions would you support ending the war in Afghanistan? And she said, "I can't think of any conditions that I would use to support to end the war in Afghanistan." And so Tyler drilled down, and he got real detailed, and he said, "When would you support bringing the troops home from Afghanistan?" And her response, it still chills me to this day. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "Never. We're never coming home from Afghanistan." Yeah. And so she's kind of been this peddler of influence. And through her, we know that we've gotten messages from her staff or from her directly to members of the Wyoming legislature who we were working with on a bill, and we can talk about that in a minute. And her staff told the legislators in Wyoming that if they passed our bill called Defend the Guard, that she would personally see to it that Wyoming lost 2 C-130 aircrafts from their arsenal, and they were sent to a state that didn't support this legislation. In another state, you'll love this, in Texas, we had a brilliant hearing on Defend the Guard. And the chairman of the committee was kind of shocked. He didn't know that we had never declared war since 1941. He couldn't believe it. In fact, he asked multiple questions because he could not believe that we had fought in all these wars without a declaration of war. And so he ended up calling our sponsor into a meeting and talking to him directly about the bill, asking him questions. And we thought he was kind of coming to our side because he was starting to have that awakening, that feeling when the veil is lifted off your eyes. And he came back and even asked him, he goes, "Now, what if we put a caveat in this bill? What if we made it so that if it doesn't pass, we could pass another bill that says," and I'm gonna stop for effect here. He said, "We will put a document in the Texas National Guard enlistment packet that each National Guard soldier that enlists will sign it and says that they understand and acknowledge that being in the National Guard, they may be asked and ordered to fight in an unconstitutional and undeclared war." He wanted to put a document in their enlistment packet. And then what's the last part of enlistment? You raise your hand to swear and uphold the Constitution of the United States. And so there's always these overtures, these offers of compromise, but nothing makes sense. The compromise is this: the founding fathers put everything on the their life, their liberty, and their fortune to create this document, right? To create a document that is the foundation of our country. And in this document, in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, it's the Enumerated Powers. It says that Congress, and Congress only, has the authority to take America from a state of peace into a state of war. Congress has the power to declare war. And we have violated that for 80 years now. And that's our big fight, is that we reframe that enumerated power and force Congress to reclaim it from the executive branch.
This may be a good time to ask a question that I've had on my mind since I knew I was going to have you on the show. And it's one of those questions that it may be so elementary and I'm just over my head and I just don't know. But it might help some people. What exactly is the difference between active duty military reserves and the National Guard?
Great question. And I've never had really a chance to explain this very well. So I'm going to sort my thoughts out as we go. The Constitution authorizes Congress the ability to raise armies, right? There's no authorization in the Constitution for a standing army at all. We've kind of gotten away from that principle, and that's a fight I don't think we could ever win. The National Guard is the state militia. It's been defined as the state militia in the 1903 or 1906 Modernization of Defense Act. So the National Guard is made up of citizen soldiers. These are people like tradesmen, police officers, firefighters, teachers, homemakers, fathers, mothers that work in the community, live in the community, but also dedicate time to be that protector of the state and of the country on a domestic front. That's the National Guard. The Army, Air Force, and Marine Corps reserves, and I think the Navy even has reserves, and I don't know about the Coast Guard, but the reserve component is a piece of the active duty military. They're a reserve or an auxiliary force for the active duty military. Generally, the National Guard and the Air Guard are warfighting combat MOSs. Their job is to fight wars and be a fighting force. The reserve component is generally a logistics and a backfill operation. There's very few combat arms reserve components. And then the active duty military is what you see at Fort Bragg and Fort Stewart and Fort Eustis and Marine Corps, Camp Pendleton, Fort Ord, other places. That's the active duty military that their job full time is to train and prepare for war and defense. Those are the three different components. And then the last component is the inactive reserve. And those are the people that are ready to be called up, but don't actively wear a uniform, but are there as a last ditch effort. Like we're in the grind and we need some dudes. Those are the ones they call.
So someone can join the National Guard from his or her state and not be a member of what the five armed forces. Is that correct?
So the National Guard is typically classified as Army, and the Air Guard is classified as the Air Force. But they're under state control. They're federally funded under state control, and they can be called into federal service two different ways. Through Title 32, which is a federally funded but state-controlled mission, like when the Idaho National Guard went to Louisiana for Hurricane Katrina, or when the California National Guard fights forest fires, or when the Texas Guard was dealing with the big freeze a month or so ago. That would be a Title 32 mission under federal funding, state-controlled, but it's a federal deployment, federal activation. The other way is Title 10 of U.S. Code, and that is when they take the state National Guard and they federalize them into federal service to go overseas for combat or for training or for humanitarian work. And that Title 32 is you no longer are the state National Guard. You are now active duty military. It's a federal call up, and the commander-in-chief, the president, becomes your commander-in-chief instead of the governor.
Great. Yeah, that kind of clarifies a lot of things for me. And so let's segue into the Defend the Guard Act. Now that we know what the Guard is, what their status is, what the legal position is, what are you trying to do with that initiative?
Sure. Yeah. So we work on this piece of legislation called Defend the Guard, and I'll give a little bit of background and then I'll explain what it is. Defend the Guard was not created, but it was kind of the forefather of Defend the Guard is a state delegate from West Virginia, an Air Force veteran who graduated from the Air Force Academy. He was an intelligence officer. His name is State Delegate Pat McGeehan. And Pat started running Defend the Guard legislation, I think 5 or 6 years ago in West Virginia, and has met all kinds of resistance. And what the bill says, and this is so constitutionally sound and so simple that it almost requires no explanation, but it's a one-page bill that says that if the National Guard of the state, so West Virginia or Idaho or Texas, whatever state passes it, their National Guard troops will not be released into federal control, right, Title 10, to go overseas for active duty combat unless Congress has first declared war. So it's very simple, very clean. And then we define what combat is, or support of combat is defined in the bill, because you have to be very clear with politicians because they don't understand up and down, left and right, and you can't get two of them to decide whether it's day or night. And so the militia clause of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the Constitution, which is where the National Guard gets its legal authority to even exist. It says that the militias of the state, or the National Guard, can be called into federal service for three purposes: to enforce the laws of the Union, to repel an invasion, or to put down an insurrection. And that's it. And it's that first one, enforce the laws of the Union, that gives the National Guard the ability to go to war, because when Congress declares war, it becomes the law of the Union. And that gives the legal basis to be called into federal control to go fight this overseas war. And so it's a very simple, clean bill. It's constitutionally supported. It's not a radical idea by any stretch of the imagination, but it's being treated radically by those that wear the stars on their collars and those that are greasing their pockets with the military-industrial complex's generous donations. And we find resistance from the adjutant generals of the states. Every time we go to testify in a state, usually the general will show up in his Class A uniform with all his ribbons, or he'll send a representative, or he'll send a written response of why he objects to the Defend the Guard bill. And his objections are usually something that are outlandish. It decreases America's ability to fight a war, or it threatens lives, or all kinds of other reasons which are silly. All it says is that the National Guard, and this is my firm belief, this is the gospel according to Dan McKnight, if America goes to war or needs to go to war, the National Guard should fight the wars. It should be the National Guard that goes and fights and wins America's wars when they're in our interest and they're properly declared. But if we're not willing to declare war, is it really necessary to take our citizen soldiers off to fight a war? It doesn't make sense. And so if they want to take the National Guard or any military troops in general to war, there should be a declaration. And so we're taking the fight to the state levels, because we know that Washington, D.C. has lost their soul and there's no way to force them to reclaim their authority. But if we took away a giant portion of their military footprint, their ability, their toolbox, if we took it away from them, unless they did their jobs, then they'd have to answer to it.
I want to go back a little bit and talk about kind of what military service can do to someone, which I think is a big part of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think it's probably a big part of your motivation for doing the work that you do. Tell me about when you joined up, when you went down to sign up. Were you just thinking, hey, I need a job and I want to get myself together? Was there something else? So what did you expect out of what you were doing, and what meaning did it have for you then?
I had no idea what to expect. I was a lost soul, right? I was going nowhere, and I was going there real fast. And the summer before I joined, we watched A Few Good Men probably 200 times. Can still quote it almost by heart. And I had this romantic view of the military right before I joined, that I was going to get to do something fun, something cool, wear the uniform, guard Guantanamo Bay. I was going to do something, but we weren't at war. The thought of fighting a war didn't really, I was born in 75, right? I mean, we'd had Grenada, we'd had Panama, but those things were kind of glossed over in the media. We'd had Desert Storm 1, but it was over so fast. It was a summer camping trip to a lot of high school kids. We didn't understand what it was really. And so I didn't really know what I was getting into. But I'll tell you, the second I got off the airplane in San Diego and put my feet on those yellow footprints that the Marine Corps have laid out for you, and snapped to the position of attention the first time with a drill instructor yelling in my ear, I knew I was in something bigger than myself. And growing up as an athlete, I played high school sports and did all that stuff. And I can coach high school football now. I always preach to the kids to throw yourself into something bigger than yourself. And that's the way I felt in the Marine Corps. I really felt that I was part of this fraternity, this elite organization, where I was doing something that very few people in the world did. And, right now, less than 0.5% of the population of our country serves in the military. It's very elite. It is very, there's very few people. And so I love the brotherhood. I love the camaraderie. I loved getting to shoot the guns and the rifle range and blowing things up and the jousting and the hand-to-hand combat. I ate it all up. And I still, to this day, would go fight for my country in any capacity I was asked to do. And so the military instilled in me this pride, this discipline, this different level of execution. It gave me that ability to kind of pull myself up by whatever bootstrap I could grab onto and power through any obstacle. And it's kind of a mentality that I've lived my life with, in everything I do, the way I run my business, the way I coach the high school football team, the way I run my house and my home. There's never an obstacle that I can't overcome because I've been given that tool in my toolbox.
I hear that a lot from people. I have a couple of close friends who have similar experiences. And there was a time from talking to them and others, hearing their stories. I remember I was born in 1975 too. I was never would think to go in the military. I've never been in shape to do it. I don't like to take orders. But I was pro-military. And I remember on 9/11, actually I'd become a libertarian, was anti-war. And then around 9/11, I was having some mental health problems, and kind of that sense of purpose that we all felt there. I kind of glommed onto that and was a neocon for 3 or 4 years after that, before coming to my senses again. And I remember being very proud that a couple of my friends, one of my closest friends, was almost a Green Beret. He got hurt at the very end of the training process and tried to stay in, but they wouldn't let him in because of his pretty severe injury. But another one of our friends did go. And I really looked up to this guy, and I really thought, oh man, this is almost, this guy's like G.I. Joe. He's going to go over there and do these great things. And I remember talking to him after he got back. I think he was in both places, Afghanistan and then later Iraq. And then he kind of comes back and he's like, yeah, the whole thing's pointless. We're never going to accomplish anything. And that was kind of maybe the first germ in my head of like, okay, why are we supporting this? If someone who is, at the very top of, you talk about elite, this guy was exactly that as a Green Beret. And if he's at the top of this, the most able troops who are able to, greatly multiply their punch their weight, so to speak, because they're so well trained in how they operate. If he thinks this is pointless, then that was such a wake up call for me. And I think that a lot of people who are in the military at all levels kind of have that moment at some point. Maybe it's just the people that I know and that I listen to. They have that moment where they're like, yeah, this is not exactly what I thought it was going to be. And so is that the case? And how do people typically react to that realization that they're in this thing that is not really living up to maybe the picture they had in their heads of what its purpose can be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there is this period of reconciliation that every veteran goes through. When you get home, we're trained to do what we call an after action review, an AAR, right? After every mission, after every training exercise, after everything we do, we stop and we evaluate it. Well, any good veteran who's been trained will leave the service and do an AAR on their own career in the military. And I know when I came home and I got hurt and I was asked not to reenlist because of my injuries. I probably could have, but I would have finished my last 7 years undeployable. I would have been just a rear asset, and I didn't want that. And I did this after action review, and I thought of all the things I'd done, all the great people I'd met, and I had this great sense of pride and relief that I'd made this decision to serve 13 years for my country. And then I started thinking about the war itself, and I couldn't think of one redeeming quality that we had done in Afghanistan that was going to last till tomorrow or next month or even next year. Nothing we did there was going to be lasting. And so to me, it felt like it was a waste. And I really hated that, because I know that the people that have died over there, their families would never say that this is a waste. Their life that was lost is not a waste. And so I had to really find a way to reconcile that in my head and make it make sense. And every American life that's been lost over there, or every injury that's been sustained, I would say this: those sacrifices are not a waste. Not an ounce of American blood that's been lost there has been a waste. But the mission that it supports has to be drawn into question. We have to question what we're doing there. And we know now that we don't know what we're doing there, right? The Afghanistan papers were very clear that the commanders, the war czar, everybody had no idea what we were doing there. In fact, we were there for at the very beginning, President Bush, when he was getting ready to invade Iraq, couldn't even tell you who the commanding general on the ground in Afghanistan was. He had no clue. He had no idea. And so poll after poll after poll that's been done since then, and probably the most disturbing one was done about a year and a half ago, when they polled veterans and their families and asked them about the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And the veterans and the families of the veterans said the same thing. 76% said that the war has gone on for too long and that it just wasn't worth fighting. 76% of the people that have been there. And I'll tell you right now, the other 24% probably are still good order following soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines that believe in the mission because their commanding officer told them it was good and virtuous. And I think once people start to reconcile what they've done there and what the state of the nation there now, there's no way that anybody can say that what we've done there has been worth it, because we haven't made any progress. And that is evidenced by who has control of the country that we fought so hard to win in. Who has control? The same people that we fought.
Yeah. You're right. You're just looking at the results of this, and that, to me, that's the people who say we should stay. Their argument is actually an argument for leaving, because they're like, oh, well, we can't leave because the country will go into chaos. And it's like, duh, like that's why, if what we've done is going to go away at once, then we really haven't accomplished anything. But beyond that, life in the military has some significant costs, I think, to the people who are in it. I think there was a thing a couple years ago where, I don't know if it was like the Army or the VA or somebody like that on their Twitter page said, hey, how has your time in the Army or whatever it was affected you? And they were hoping to get, all the good things, that there are some good things. They were hoping to get, it gave me purpose and all that. But instead, they got a lot of responses about, friends who had committed suicide, families that were broken, injuries that they deal with, other health issues. Tell me some of the stories. Obviously, not I don't expect you to name names, but what are things that you're hearing from other vets who, their motivation for speaking out against this? I would think it would have to be some of those costs that they really incurred.
Sure. There's a Green Beret. I think it's 20th group of the Green Berets. They're National Guardsmen that actually are Green Beret qualified and trained. And they're one of the most highly deployed units in the entire military. They're National Guardsmen that come from the Northwest, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah, I think, is the geographic boundaries. And I've got a friend that is part of that group, and he deployed, I want to say 8 times to the global war before he was eventually blown up in an attack. And his best friend and another member of his team were killed. And this man has come home to Idaho, being a National Guardsman. He came home with the active duty Green Berets that were also attacked. And as soon as he hit American soil, the active duty military went to Walter Reed Medical Center, and he was sent back to Boise, Idaho to receive his care and treatment at home, because he was National Guard Green Beret, not active duty. And if it wasn't for the fact that he had been a collegiate football player at a major university here in America, who invited him to go down and get their treatment from their university hospital, he would have been left to his own devices here in Boise, Idaho, without the TBI centers, without the mental health capacity that Walter Reed has. And he really struggled. And another gentleman here in Idaho, and I'll use his name because he's told this story before, Ben Adams, who was our bill sponsor here in Idaho. He's a 2-time deployed combat Marine, and he was there in Afghanistan during the surge and the drawdown, 2 different deployments. So one time he was there, with 120,000 Marines, and the other time they were drawing that back down to under 40,000. And their job there on the last deployment was to protect a local warlord. We call him a warlord. He was just a village elder, right? And he's the one that controls the local military, the local police force, the local economic production, everything. And our job was to protect him. And in Afghanistan, they have a culture there. It's a pedophile culture called bachi-bazi, and it's where little boys are sex slaves for these village elders and these warlords. And on Thursday, they dress them up like little girls. They paint their fingers. They dye their hair. They make them more makeup. And these village elders abuse these little boys. And it's part of it's a tradition there. Obviously, it's the most disgusting and vile thing we can talk about. But that one of those sex slaves saw America as the protector of his abuser, because we were supporting this warlord. And that young boy somehow got a hold of an AK-47 from his abuser. And instead of turning it on the abuser who was doing the damage to him, he turned it on the Marines that were protecting him. And that little boy killed 3 Marines in an attack, or 4 Marines. I can't remember the exact number, and I apologize for not having the details exactly right. But Ben Adams was working the radio that day. He was the controller for that area of combat. And he had to call in, medevac to go pick up his brother and his fellow Marines who had been killed by this sex slave. And he had to control his emotions throughout that entire mission to get his brethren evacuated back to the rear so they could be returned to their families. And the weight that he carries on his shoulders today, and it's been 10 years, the weight he carries is undescribable. He does a good job of burying it, but when you get him talking in a one-on-one situation, it comes out. And he wrote an incredible guest opinion that was published. I can't remember which national media outlet picked it up, talking about this, asking Liz Cheney to stop forcing Americans to prop up the pedophile culture in Afghanistan. And Ben's story is one that you'll never hear in the national media. You'll never hear of America propping up the opium trade. You'll never hear of us propping up these warlords, these abusers. Instead, what we hear is Senator Jeanne Shaheen from New Hampshire saying that protecting Afghanistan women should be a cornerstone of American foreign policy and a worthy and worthwhile cause and mission for the United States military. I'm sorry. I agree. Women should have equal rights. They should be treated fairly. But we're protecting an establishment that is now giving women rights, but at the same time abusing little boys. We are not good on this. We should not be picking winners and losers over there. And that mental toll is carried by veterans when they come home. The sacrifices and the things that we do in war are so vile and undescribable that it carries a heavy burden. And then you layer on top of that being away from your family for an extended period of time, deploying over and over and over again, multiple deployments, being away from those that you love, coming home to uncertainty, coming home to an environment where people honor and praise you for things that you hold very private in the back of your mind in places that you don't want to talk about. And people just want to thank you and rain praise down on you and buy you a coffee in line and give you free fajitas on Veterans Day. It doesn't help when you're trying to bury those very painful memories. And so we know veteran suicide is an epidemic right now. And they say it's 22 veterans a day are committing suicide. I don't know if that number is accurate. I think it's probably lower than what is in reality, because I think a lot of suicides don't get reported. But the best way to honor a veteran is to quit making them. Quit sending us over there. Quit sending us to a war that's never been declared, that may be unjust, and asking us to do things that probably aren't in the benefit or actual defense of our country.
Given all that, how do you feel? I have a reaction to this, and it happens all the time. But I'd be interested to hear what you think about it. I'm a big baseball fan, go to a lot of Cincinnati Reds games. And at the beginning, I don't know if they're doing it this year. I haven't been up there. But I think it's at the beginning of the second inning, they have, they call it the hometown hero, whatever. They have somebody who is a veteran of some kind stand up on top of the dugout, and they start to announce, what this person's name and background is. And before the announcer can even say the person's name and like branch of service and all that, people are already on their feet, just thunderous applause. And then also it happens once in a while, these reunions, where the family thinks they're there to throw out the first pitch or to get, to meet a player, and, the dad or the mom comes home. What goes through your mind when you see things like that, and what's the motivation behind why they, the Defense Department funds all that?
Sure. This is a very, very touchy subject for me, and I'll explain why. I think that any veteran that served in combat or in defense of the country or even during a time of peace is worthy of all that praise. There's no question. They're giving themselves to something bigger than themselves, and they're willing to give everything up into the value of their own life in defense of the country. Now, just because they're worthy of that praise, I don't find that praise proper or done in good taste. And this is gospel according to Dan. Once upon a time, Veterans Day and Memorial Day were enough, right? 2 days a year, once when we honor the fallen and once when we honor those that served, was just enough. And we've gotten to this point of hyper-militarism where we recruit and we promote the military in video games to children as young as 3 and 4 years old, right? We have active duty military recruiters in our schools. We see the commercials where the Marine pulls out his sword and he fights the skeleton, right? And he slays him. We make it glorious. And as part of the recruiting effort, I get that. We have an all-volunteer force. We need that. But what we don't need is that hyper-vigilant, hyper-sensitive, tie a yellow ribbon around every damn tree in town and every stop sign. We put our military up on this pedestal because we don't know what else to do. All we know now, and in fact, there's an entire generation of us in America that don't know anything but America at war. And so we feel like we have to honor these people as superheroes. And it's okay. It is okay to view them that way. But what's more important, buying a veteran a cup of coffee or letting him board the airplane first or giving him the free meal at Denny's on Veterans Day? Is that the important part? Or would the important part be to honor the veterans who have sworn an oath to the Constitution and ask them to defend the entire Constitution and then just not create more veterans because we have violated the Constitution? I'd say it's the latter. It'd be better to honor the Constitution, do it the right way. And in World War II, 11% of the population served in the military. 11. That's a pretty small number. Today, it's less than 0.5%. So 99.5% of the population have no literal skin in the game when it comes to these forever wars, and they don't know what else to do. I think deep in our hearts, we know that these wars are vile, and we see overwhelming majorities in poll after poll that nobody in America thinks that the wars have gone on for too long. They just don't know what else to do. Well, here's an action item. Instead of buying somebody a damn coffee, instead of letting them have your seat on an airplane, instead of clapping for them at a football game or a baseball game, do this. Go to defendtheguard.us. Go to bringourtroopshome.us. Those are two websites. And you can sign up at either one of those places to follow what we're doing. And there's going to be a time when we will reach out to people in certain geographic areas. If you join from Ohio, we may reach out to you and say, we're pushing Defend the Guard in Ohio, and we need you to sign this petition and send a letter to your local elected representative. That would be a greater honor than to buy somebody a $4 cup of coffee. Quit making veterans, combat veterans, quit making more of them. Right now we have a serving class that has been in the wars that is overwhelming the VA medical centers. Let's honor us by stop sending us to fight in these forever wars. Right now, we've got military fighting in Djibouti, in Mozambique, all across the Horn of Africa, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, Central America, South America. We have active duty military. I believe the number right now is 70 countries have active combat operations in them. That's absurd. We're an empire. We're meant to be a federalist nation, and we're not necessarily isolationists, but we should be a friend and a trading partner to all, and a political ally to all, but a protector or an encumbered military force to none. We should fight for our own interests and defend our interests, not those of the world.
I will sign up and see what I can do here in Tennessee. And I don't know if you come around and speak or testify and stuff like that. If there's anything I can help you with here in Tennessee, I'd love to do that. What else? We've talked about the Defend the Guard Act. What else is Bring Our Troops Home doing? What initiatives? What's on the horizon? What's working? Give me a picture of the health of the organization and what you're doing right now.
Sure. BringOurTroopsHome.us again is the website, and we do a War Powers pledge every congressional election. So we send a pledge out to every single congressional candidate that's running for Congress or Senate, asking them to sign this simple pledge that says that they will never abdicate their role and responsibility in matters of war. That if there's a need for the United States to go to war, that they will vote on a declaration of war and not give away that authority to the executive branch. That takes a lot of money. Sending those out and getting responses and tracking them and doing the media releases is expensive. So donations, we're funded all by private small donations. We don't have any deep pockets that are pushing us along. And so that's one thing. Another thing we do is we do a lot of education. And we do travel around. We do testify in state legislatures. We do try to attend rallies. We put on an event in Pennsylvania last year at the grave of the Marine Corps General Smedley Butler, who wrote the pamphlet, War is a Racket. Two-time Medal of Honor recipient, probably would have gotten it 3 times, but he wasn't allowed to get it the 3rd time because it didn't exist in that form. One of the greatest war fighters our country has ever known. And we did a memorial at his grave on the 19th anniversary of the invasion of Afghanistan. I believe it was on 10/7. And we do those things. We'll fly veterans out to be a part of it. Those are some of the things we do. Mostly we're an education and an activist organization. And what we need is grassroots members of the Army, people that are willing to stand up and send a letter, to write a guest opinion, to sign a petition, to come on shows like this and spread the word, to bring other veterans together. And the way you do that is, again, by signing up at either of those 2 websites. So those are some of the things we're really pushing. And then we oppose literally anything that the warmongers in Washington, D.C. do. So when we see Jeanne Shaheen or Liz Cheney or Crenshaw or Lindsey Graham or any of the other typical warmongers, when they raise their ugly heads, the only tool we have in our toolbox is a hammer, and every one of them is a nail. And we just do our best to swat them down and play whack-a-mole and educate their voters. And we're going to be working really hard in Wyoming this year to defeat Liz Cheney in the primary. That's a massive, massive goal for our organization, is if we can get rid of the heiress of the war profiteer fortune, the merchant of death, sweet Elizabeth herself. If we can do that, I feel like our organization would really put a stamp on the future of this country. And so we're doing that, and we're working with people that we really love and respect. Tom Massey and Andy Biggs, Rand Paul, Ro Khanna, who's a liberal Democrat who is so good on this issue that you have to pay attention to him. Barbara Lee in California. We do things to support the people that have supported ending the war or repealing the AUMFs or reclaiming that war power authority. And that's what our organization is doing. If we can get 200, 300, 400,000 veterans in the organization to mobilize at once, that becomes a very significant grassroots army, and people will have to listen. And our numbers are swelling, and we're already drawing attention. And we want to double, triple, and quadruple our numbers so that we can literally walk into any office in Washington, D.C. and demand an audience and demand an action.
That sounds great. And I will put links to what you're doing up on the show notes page. And I'll try to find some other good material. I'm sure I'll find it of what you guys have been doing, put it up there. I have 2 quick questions before we go. One is kind of this person you mentioned, I think, in the interview I heard with you and Dave Smith. I have the chance. Ron Paul is going to come on the show. I'm going to interview him a week from today, and his episode is actually going to air before yours because he'll be the 50th episode. But what has Ron Paul meant to all this, and what would you like for me to say to him or ask him? What would be a good thing for us to talk about?
First and foremost, send our wishes of good health and longevity. When Dr. Paul fell ill a year ago, it was a blow to our psyche, to our mental health. I mean, that man America doesn't deserve that man. He's been more right on the Constitution than anybody else. And what I would love you to do, if you have a chance, is to ask him this question. Or not even ask him the question, remind him of this brilliant move that he made in 2002. He opposed the invasion of Iraq, and he was right. George W. Bush was dead ass wrong, right? He was wrong on Iraq. Ron Paul, who loves and honors and reveres the Constitution, said, okay, if you feel that it's necessary for America to go into war and invade a sovereign country in Iraq, let's do it the right way and let's declare war. And here, I wrote a resolution, a proper declaration of war, and I'm going to submit it in my own name, but I'm going to vote against it. And he submitted a resolution, a declaration of war in the United States House of Representatives. And Henry Hyde, who was the chairman of the committee, scolded Dr. Paul and said, that part of the Constitution doesn't exist. That part doesn't mean what you think it means. We ignore it. It is obsolete. And ultimately never let the resolution or the declaration of war go forward. And so I would just ask you to remind him of that. And he knows of the Defend the Guard. We've talked on his show on Liberty. Is it Liberty University? I forget the name of his show.
Well, Ron Paul Liberty Report, right?
Liberty Report. Yep, we were on there and we talked about it. He loves the Defend the Guard concept. He's been a champion. He talks about it fairly frequently. And but yeah, primarily give him our wishes of good health and longevity, and then remind him of that proud moment when he stood up to President George W. Bush in the invasion of Iraq and said, we're going to follow the Constitution.
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. He does mean so much to us here at the Mises Caucus. And I got a chance to interview him for the same project that I interviewed Dennis Kucinich for back in 2012, right before he left office. And I remember asking him, what do you think about your time here in DC? What did you accomplish? And he said, well, nothing here in DC. Like, he didn't get many, if any, bills passed and all that. But I think he realizes, and we're going to remind him of that, of, the legacy that he has left, that people like you are doing the work you're doing. What we're doing at the Mises Caucus are just two of the sort of the seeds that he planted that are now growing up to be trees. One last question, and I sometimes find myself, recently found myself in this position. I didn't say anything. There was someone who I kind of know who was considering joining the Army, and he went ahead and did it. I didn't feel it was my place. Had I been asked my opinion, I would have given it, but I didn't interject myself into the situation. What would you say to someone who is thinking, who was maybe in the same situation you were in when you joined up? What would you say to that person, or what would you say to that person's family? What would be a good way to someone in that situation? What do they need to hear that might sink in? I don't know if that's a good question or not.
No,
I think that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll explain it this way, and I hope this makes sense without being. It's not intended to be offensive to anybody that didn't serve, but this is the way I would describe it. There's different ways to change the status quo, right? You can stand on the outside, and you can scream and yell about the status quo, what's normal, and I would consider that an immoral action, right? You can join an organization and say nothing and go along with the status quo. And I would say that is an immoral action. You can join an organization and then work from within using their rules and their battlefield and their equipment and their resources and their training to change the organization for the better from the inside. And I would say that's a very moral action. And then finally, if you disagree with the status quo and you're a member of that organization, you can resign and leave honorably. And I think that's the highest order of morality. And so I would say to anybody that's going in, you're going in knowing that you're a part of the military, and your job as a member of the military is to fight and defend for the country, to fight and defend democracy, and then primarily to defend the Constitution of the United States and your fellow citizens. And so joining the military, I think there's no greater honor than to be willing to sacrifice yourself for something bigger than yourself. And the military is one of those ways you can do that. And so I would tell people, if you're going to join, go eyes wide open. Right? Understand that the organization itself is noble, but it's not perfect, right? It is not infallible. And you are going to be asked to do some things that may violate your personal principles, but it's up to you to maintain your true north, your compass. And as long as you understand where that compass is, you have the ability then, when you're done with the military, when you're done with your career, you're able to stand out on the outside and maintain that military bearing, right? Look at me. I still maintain a military haircut, right? I'm not a counterculturist. I'm fighting the organization, not the military, but the organization that abuses the military. And I'm doing it from the outside after serving honorably. So if anybody is willing to join, there's no greater honor, and they will love what they do, but they have to go in eyes wide open and know that they have an obligation to fight and defend the Constitution of the United States first, not their officers. It's their job to defend the Constitution. And I'm not saying that they should go and disobey lawful orders. They should do their job. They should do it honorably. And then when their time is done, then they can stand up and say, I did it. It's wrong. Here's the way it should be. But when you're in the military, you have to follow the orders of your officers. You have to. Otherwise, a undisciplined military will bring down a country.
Great. I appreciate that answer, and it's pretty thoughtful. I'm going to have to go back and listen to that and I think to get the full meaning of it. But for someone who has a much different perspective on things than I do, I just really value people like you who have done something with that, maintain that integrity, or in some cases maybe refound that integrity, when a lot of people, I think, not just veterans, but I think a lot of us in life, we don't speak out about things, or we don't try to change things, or we try not to think about things because a lot of our identity is wrapped up in that, and to question that or challenge it and try to change it is like questioning your own identity and the meaning of what you did. And so I really appreciate the courage that it takes for you to do what you're doing. I hope if there's any way we can ever help here in the Mises Caucus, if you are focusing your efforts in a particular state, and I can send an email out to just the people in that state who are on our email list. We'd love to help out with that. And we just appreciate your work. And I'll give you one last chance to tell people where to go and what to do. Last plugs here.
Absolutely. The Mises Caucus, I'm going to say this real quick, is an incredible organization of liberty-minded folks who just get it. They just understand it. And I don't have to spend an hour explaining the principle or the constitutionality of the bill or the purpose of being anti-war as a veteran. The Mises Caucus just gets it. And so thank you. I appreciate the support. And we've been working with the Mises Caucus in several states. And in closing, I just want to do one last thing. We have several places where people can follow us. On Twitter and Facebook, we're at Troops Home US. And our website is bringourtroopshome.us. And our other website is defendtheguard.us. We are getting ready to launch a new wing or a new project called the 10-7 Club, right? 10-7 being the day that we invaded Afghanistan. 10-7club.com. I'd encourage people it should be up next week. By the time this program airs, it will be up. And one of the first things we're going to be doing, is because we believe in the Constitution, we love it, is we're going to be giving away an AR-15 free, no charge, to members that sign, not to everybody, obviously, but it's a giveaway. You sign up and we will draw a name and we give it out, mostly because we want to thank the members who have been supporting us on Defend the Guard and some other things. And so we'll encourage people to go to that 10-7 Club and sign up for that gun giveaway. You'll get some other cool swag, some stickers, patches. We have T-shirts that'll be coming out. 10-7 is a place for veterans and like-minded, liberty-loving Americans to gather and share comments and share thoughts and beliefs and join the grassroots army. And so with that, I want to thank all of the veterans that are already a part of our organization and those that support the organization. We couldn't do what we do without the support buttressing us from the side. It is a lonely place to be a veteran, to speaking out against the military. And we've seen what our country has done to those type of people throughout time. Luckily for us, we don't live in those times anymore, where we're allowed to speak our mind and have political redress for our grievances. And our grievance is that the Constitution's been abused and misused, and it's time to bring that back to where it's supposed to be.
Great, Dan. I really appreciate you making time for us today.
You bet. Aaron, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
And there you have it. I'd like to thank Dan McKnight for his time and all his hard work on the very most important issue there is, which is ending all these wars. I'll have links pointing to a few of the things we discussed in this episode up on the show notes page at decentralizedrevolution.com/50. I encourage everyone to join their email list over at bringourtroopshome.us so you can stay in touch with what they're doing, especially if they are trying to accomplish something in your state with the state legislature, the governor. They would probably love to have you come down when they testify, make some phone calls, things like that. So please go over to bringourtroopshome.us. Thanks to Dave vs. Goliath for all the music you hear on Decentralized Revolution. And I'd like to thank everyone who gives to Mises PAC at takehumanaction.com and everyone who shares, rates, reviews, and subscribes to Decentralized Revolution. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.